Christian Felber's Change Everything is a visionary and uncompromising call to fundamentally transform the systems that structure our world. At its core, the book is a rejection of the idea that our current economic, social, and political arrangements are natural, unchangeable, or inevitable. Felber argues that the modern world, dominated by neoliberal capitalism, is built on a deeply flawed foundation, one that prioritizes endless economic growth, individualism, and profit over people, community, and the planet. He asserts that this paradigm has led to multiple interwoven crises: climate catastrophe, rising inequality, alienation, and a widespread sense of despair, and that meaningful change requires not incremental reform, but a radical rethinking of the very principles upon which our societies are built. One of Felber's central arguments is that capitalism is not just an economic system, but a cultural and psychological one. It shapes how we view ourselves, others, and the world. For instance, under capitalism, human beings are often reduced to consumers, and their value is linked to their productivity or purchasing power. Nature, similarly, is commodified. Forests become lumber, rivers become water rights, and even intangible concepts like time and attention are monetized through digital platforms. This logic extends to nearly every facet of life, leading to widespread burnout, ecological degradation, and a loss of meaning. Felber writes not only to expose this dehumanizing logic, but to propose alternatives that restore dignity, cooperation, and sustainability as central values. Felber emphasizes that small, individual actions are insufficient in the face of structural breakdowns. Recycling, driving less, or eating plant-based may be morally motivated and symbolically important, but they do not address the root causes of ecological and social crises. These actions, he suggests, can even serve as distractions, placating our guilt while allowing the underlying systems to remain untouched. As an example, he critiques the notion of the carbon footprint, which was popularized by BP, one of the world's largest oil companies, in a strategic move to shift responsibility for climate change from corporations to individuals. Such tactics, Felber argues, highlight how systems of power actively deflect blame and obstruct real accountability. Instead of placing the burden on individuals, Felber advocates for collective, systemic change. He draws inspiration from historical and contemporary movements that have reimagined society in bold ways. The Zapatistas in Mexico, who created autonomous communities rooted in indigenous knowledge and self-governance. Worker-owned cooperatives in Spain's Mondragon region that operate on principles of democracy and solidarity. And the climate justice movement, which connects environmental issues with racial, social, and economic justice. These examples serve not only as counterpoints to mainstream systems, but as living proof that alternative modes of living are possible and already happening. One of the most compelling ideas in the book is that imagination is a political act. Felber argues that the ruling systems work not only by controlling resources and institutions, but also by limiting what people believe is possible. When people lose the ability to imagine different futures, they become resigned to the present, even if it is harmful. This is what Felber refers to as the dictatorship of no alternative, a phrase reminiscent of Margaret Thatcher's infamous "there is no alternative" Tina doctrine. He sees hope not as naive, wishful thinking, but as an act of resistance. To imagine a world without homelessness, without exploitative labor, without environmental destruction, is to challenge the status quo and create space for change. Felber encourages readers to reclaim their imaginative capacities through storytelling, art, education, and community building. Throughout the book, Felber speaks to the importance of building systems of care and interdependence. He critiques the hyper-individualism that underpins much of Western society, which fosters competition, isolation, and a false sense of self-sufficiency. He points out how the COVID-19 pandemic, for instance, exposed both the failures and the potential of our social systems. On the one hand, it revealed how fragile our healthcare and labor systems are under the pressures of profit maximization. On the other, it showcased the power of mutual aid networks, where communities self-organized to deliver food, medical supplies, and emotional support. These moments, Faber argues, are glimpses of what a caring economy could look like, one in which people are not abandoned to the market, but supported by relationships of solidarity. A powerful strand in Change Everything is Faber's focus on language and narrative. He unpacks how the language we use reflects and reinforces systems of power. For example, terms like human capital, natural resources, or externalities conceal violence and exploitation behind the guise of economic rationality. He argues that changing the world begins with changing the stories we tell about it. This means redefining success not as accumulation of wealth, but as flourishing communities, redefining freedom not as the absence of constraint, but as the presence of connection and purpose. Faber also calls attention to youth and future generations, who are increasingly disillusioned with traditional pathways and institutions. He notes how young people around the world are leading the charge for climate justice, racial equity, gender liberation, and post-capitalist alternatives. Movements like Fridays for Future, Black Lives Matter, and Occupy are not perfect, but they represent the emergence of a new political consciousness, one that is intersectional, decentralized, and driven by a refusal to accept a dying world. Faber encourages readers to support and amplify these movements, not by co-opting them or placing unrealistic expectations on them, but by standing in solidarity and learning from their courage and creativity. In his closing chapters, Faber outlines a vision of what a transformed world might look like. He describes economies rooted in cooperation, not competition, where workplaces are democratically owned, where housing is a right, not a commodity, and where ecological regeneration replaces extraction. He imagines cities designed for people rather than cars, with accessible public transit, green spaces, and spaces for art and community. He imagines a world where education nurtures curiosity instead of obedience, and where governance is participatory, inclusive, and accountable. These ideas are not utopian in the naive sense, but grounded in real-world experiments and principles already being tested by communities around the world. Ultimately, Change Everything is a searing critique and a hopeful manifesto. Faber's voice is both poetic and prophetic, blending philosophical depth with practical urgency. He does not offer easy answers, but he provides a moral and imaginative framework for those who refuse to accept that this is the best we can do. He challenges readers not just to hope passively, but to act boldly, to become co-creators of a new world, to change everything, he insists. We must first believe that everything can change.